Right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the end of the first week at Leeds Digital Festival. My name's Claire Cox, and I work for the technology consultancy Scott Logic here in Leeds. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Paul Graham, who'll be talking to us about the computer skills of average Joe and how they might be worse than you think. If you have any questions as we go through the webinar, pop them into the question box and we'll take as many as we can at the end. But before we get going, let me tell you a little bit about today's speaker. Paul is a lead developer at Scott Logic with over 20 years of experience working in the Northeast software development community. He spends his days developing high quality software that meets the requirements of the client and the needs of the users. He's also passionate about best practices in both UX and Agile methodologies and is a co-organizer of the Agile Northeast meetup. Away from his keyboard, he enjoys riding his bicycle up hills. So without any further ado, let me pass you over to Paul to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Guess you can, Claire, give me a nod if you can hear me. You can hear me. I'm looking good. Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to tell you about the computer skills of average Joe and why they might be worse than you might think. So if we were all together in a room, I'd ask for a show of hands. So fortunately, Zoom has a raise hands feature. You should see it on the call. So let's use that. So I want you to raise your virtual hand if you have ever had to help a family member or a friend complete a task of some sort that involved using a computer or technology of some kind. So 4 or 5, everybody's putting their hands up. This is good. This is good. This is what I wanted to see. So everybody pretty much in the call has had to help somebody. So thanks, everybody. That's pretty much most of you. So now I want you to raise your hand again if you had to help a family member or a friend complete a task of some sort involved using a computer or technology. And you'd already helped them with that task once before. So you've helped them with it before, and you've had to help them again. Everybody's putting their hands up again. This is what I'd expect, pretty much. We all work in tech, so we are the go-to guys when people have a tech problem. So I kind of wanted to give a bit of context to that. So when you answered that question, I want you to sort of just have a little think about who that person was who you were helping and what they did in their lives. And I'm going to tell you a story. So I'll tell you a story first off. I like starting these things with a story. So my wife booked a kayaking session through Woucher, and the kayaking session was, we were having difficulty contacting the people to organize the kayaking session, and they were trying to send us emails to tell us when we should turn up with our kids to get them on this kayaking session. And we were trying to contact them by phone, left a couple of messages. We didn't know whether or not the session was going to go ahead. This was last Sunday. So we rang them. We left a message, and they called us back in the afternoon. Called my wife back, but it wasn't the sort of owner of the company. It wasn't the guy who ran the company. It was his sort of assistant. And she said, "Oh no, he sent everybody an email. He sent everybody an email this afternoon." She was absolutely adamant that this email had gone out to say the session was going ahead and we should turn up and had joining instructions and everything like that. Can't understand it. Can you check your junk folder? That's standard go-to. So my wife checked her junk folder. No email there. Well, we definitely haven't had this email. What's going on? So you could hear this lady basically investigating what had happened on to this email, and she worked out that the guy had sent the email to himself. So he'd clicked reply to try and send it to all the attendees, and he'd gone reply, and obviously the reply had replied to the sender of the email, and the sender of the email was him. So he'd emailed himself joining instructions for his own kayaking session. Simple mistake to make, surely. Then I had another experience the other week. It was my wife's birthday. We went to the seaside in Sunderland, and it was a lovely sunny day. And you go to park your car, and we all know nowadays that you can put change into the machine and get a ticket out, or you can go online and go onto an app, parking app, and put a code in for the location and pay for your parking online, and you put your registration number in. And I got that all sorted out for our car. But there was another family. A guy was sitting in his car looking absolutely perplexed And he'd put the code in, and the app had just told him that the code was invalid. So his location code on his app was invalid. And he directly asked me, I don't know how he knew that I worked in tech, but he asked me, have you been able to do this, mate? I was like, oh, yeah, it was fine, just put the code in. And I was like, oh, I can't get it to work. And he was really sort of struggling with this really simple app where you just had to put the code in and then put your payment details in. And that kind of, I don't know much about him, but it struck me as sort of one of those situations where somebody's struggling with a piece of technology, and what they want to do is speak to a human to get help. So those two things happened. But the kayaking session, going back to that, we went along and we got it all sorted in the end. And our kayaking instructor was brilliant, and the kids had a lovely time. So, you know, it all worked out all worked out all right in the end. But that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about this. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is basically a club of industrialized countries, conducted an international skills research study, and 39 industrialized countries participated. And there were over 245,000 people surveyed, with at least 5,000 participants in most countries. And the data was collected between 2011 and 2018. And the results of the study were first published in 2016, and a further report was published in 2019. So I'm going to take some time to tell you about the study and talk through the results and explain why you should care about them. The skills test was aimed at people between the age of 16 and 65, and they're referred to as adults in the report that was produced, and included 14 computer-based tasks using simulated software. So you'll note from that that people aged 66 and over were excluded, even though they might be a major part of the user group for many websites and applications. The tasks set ranged in difficulty from very straightforward to somewhat complicated. So an example of an easy task would be to use the reply all feature of an email program to send a response to 3 people. Now that's pretty easy, right? One of the difficult tasks was to book a meeting in a scheduling application using information from several separate email messages. So this is difficult because the problem statement's implicit. The problem statement is just schedule a meeting. So it involves multiple steps and constraints. You've got to find out when everybody's free. You've got to find out when the meeting room's free. It would have been a lot easier if the problem were explicit. So if the problem were book a meeting for 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, that's easy. So having to determine the ultimate need based on piecing together many pieces of information across separate applications increases the difficulty of the task for many of our users. But again, for our audience, this is easy enough, right? The results of the skills test allowed the researchers to place a percentage of users into one of 4 skill levels based on the upper limit of their technical ability. So we're going to go through those 4 skill levels yet, and I've got some example users. Maybe you'll recognize them. Maybe keep score about whether or not you recognize where they're from. So this is Champ, and Champ, he's a sportscaster on the news network KVWN. Recognize where Champ's from? So Champ, he's a below level 1 user, or Champ. So the OECD researchers were too polite to use the term level 0, so we just have below level 1. Now at below level 1, problems are really well defined, and it requires the use of one function within a generic interface, such as an email app. And the desired outcome is explicit, so no reasoning or transforming of information is required. So delete this email message. That's an example of a below level 1 task. Okay, so that's simple enough, yeah? And the survey results showed that 14% of users had below level 1 skills. Now let's move on. This is Death. I don't know where you recognize Death from. So Death, he's a little bit better. He's responsible for the collecting of souls and or guiding people to the afterlife, depending on what your beliefs are. He also finds time to play double bass. Death, he's a bit better. He's a level 1 user. He's got some more skills than Champ. And at level 1, the task will involve a few steps and some operators. It will require the use of widely available and familiar technology applications like an email client or a word processor. there is little or no navigation required to access the information or the commands required to solve the problem. So everything's sort of fairly obvious and available. And identifying content and operators can be done through a simple match. There's no need to contrast any information or integrate any information from multiple sources. So the reply to all task that I mentioned a bit earlier, that requires level 1 skills. And another example of a task for a level 1 user would be find all emails from Bill S. Preston Esquire. So what we're going to do now is see whether or not our audience know their user skill set. So you think about your users, or think about the general population, and we had 14% for below level 1. So do we think that the percentage of respondents, do we think that the percentage, sorry about that. Do we think that the percentage of respondents with level 1 skills is higher or lower than 14%? Now Claire's going to put a poll up in the Zoom thing. So you just choose higher or lower. And
that poll should be on the screen right now. So we're just going to give you about 30 seconds, if that, to get your answers in. In fact, everybody's responded.
Cool.
So
let's share those results then.
Poll, here we go. There you go. You should be able to see the results.
All
now.
right, that's interesting. Okay, so we've gone about like a 60-40, 65-35 split. That's very good. So in reality, 29% of users have level 1 skills. So this 29% could complete these tasks and the below level 1 tasks, but that's the upper limit of their technical ability. So that's interesting. Maybe we don't know much about our user skills. We'll see how we get on. So let's move on to level 2. This is Data, and Data is a James Bond fanatic and a gadgeteer. Data is a level 2 user. At level 2, the task's a bit more complicated and may involve multiple steps or operators, and the goal may have to be defined by the respondent, but the criteria to be met are explicit. So level 2 tasks involve both generic and specific applications. So for example, the user may need to make use of a complex online form rather than like a generic application like an email client. And some navigation across pages and applications is required. So you might need to flip between a couple of pages to complete a level 2 task. And the use of tools can facilitate the resolution of the problem. And at this point, we start introducing unexpected outcomes or impasses. So if you use a computer day to day to work in tech, maybe unexpected outcomes and impasses are things that you just deal with day in, day out. Just like that guy who was trying to use the parking app that I mentioned at the start. He got an unexpected outcome and he really didn't know what to do. So an example of a level 2 task would be something like find the treasure map PDF that was emailed to you by Richard Data Wang in December 2020, or maybe more familiarly for us, find that development document build environment setup doc that was sent to you by John Smith in October of last year. Like maybe you've got a new starter. How do I set my build up? Oh, I'll find that document that the guy sent me when I started. And you go back through your emails to try and find this document, try and narrow down your search so you successfully complete your task. So we've got another poll. So another higher or lower. So we had 29% of the respondents that had level 1 skills. So do we think as an audience that the percentage of respondents with level 2 skills is higher or lower than 29%? And Claire's put the poll up again. So let's see what we think.
Yeah, we can see the votes coming in. So we'll just again give you a few more seconds and then I'll close the poll and share the results. So most people have voted now, so I'm going to close that poll.
Okay, let's see. So lower. Everybody's gone lower this time, and it's pretty much the same split as last time. That's quite interesting. Good stuff. It is slightly lower. It's 26%. So it's about a quarter of the population. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to the next level. So this is Ben. We all recognize Ben. Ben, he's a Jedi Master. Ben is a level 3 user. And at level 3 tasks, they place higher demands on the respondents. The goal may be unclear. The criteria to be met might not be explicitly defined. And at this level, the use of generic and specific technology applications is required. So you're going to need to use something that's specifically designed for a task, and also maybe a generic application like an email client or a word processor, or something like that, or a spreadsheet system. So the user needs to navigate between multiple pages and applications. Right? This doesn't just happen on a single page within an application. You've got to switch between things to complete a level 3 task. And the use of tools, for example, like a sort function might help. In fact, sorry, not might help. It's actually required to complete the task successfully. You're going to have to use some sort of functionality within your application to complete a level 3 task. And at this level, it's likely that you're not going to get there the first time. You're going to try one course of action to complete the task, and something's going to go wrong, and you're going to have to rethink. And finally, some reasoning might be needed, sometimes to a large extent. So if we think about a level 3 task, this is an example. You want to know the percentage of emails sent to you last month by Princess Leia Organa that were about the Death Star. So this is pretty complex. Think about how you go about doing this. You'd need to find all the emails from Leia Organa to start with. You'd have to count them up. You'd have to make maybe note of that. Then you'd have to work out which ones are about the Death Star. Maybe some of them aren't explicitly about the Death Star. They don't have Death Star in the subject. Maybe they're just mentioned in a postscript. Then you've got to work out that percentage calculation, and then you get your answer. You can see how that's like there's many steps. And also you might find an impasse at that point. You might find that you can't find all the emails from Princess Leia Organa, or maybe you miss a couple because a couple have just references within the text rather than being explicitly sort of marked out by their subject. So let's have another poll, our final poll. Sorry, second to last poll. Got another one coming up. What do we think? Higher or lower than 26% for level 3 users?
Again, just give you a few seconds. Lots of people
get your votes in. How well do we know our users?
Right, I'm going to close the poll here and share the results.
Thank you very much for taking part in these polls. Lower, 100% lower, brilliant. That's a categorical. We all think there aren't very many level 3 users, but how many? What's the actual percentage? Do we think? You might be surprised to find that it's as low as 5%. 5% of the respondents to the survey had level 3 user skills. That's 1 in 20. Now, in the UK and Australia, it's 6% of users actually, and that rises to 7% for Canada and Northern Europe. And Singapore and Japan are even better at 8%. But 6% of users is still not a very large percentage of the population. But hold on a sec. That's below level 1 users, 14%. Level 1 users were 29%. Level 2 users were 26%. And our level 3 users at 5%. That doesn't add up to 100%. So what about the rest? This is Buddy. The numbers for the 4 skill levels don't sum up to 100% because a large proportion of the respondents made no attempt to complete the tasks. So across the OECD, 26% of adults were unable to use a computer. That breaks down as 11.7% who had no prior computer experience, so they took a paper-based version of the assessment. 4.7% had prior computer experience but failed the ICT core test assessing basic ICT skills. So they weren't able to use a mouse or scroll through a website. That reminds me of that scene in I, Daniel Blake. I don't know if anybody's seen it, where he says, take the mouse and scroll up the side of the screen, and he picks the mouse up and runs it up the side of the screen. Like, that really resonated with me, that scene. And 10% opted just to take a paper-based test and did not take the ICT core test. So they just opted out. But Buddy isn't a cotton-headed ninny-muggins. Buddy helped Santa repair the engine on Santa's sleigh and saved Christmas. These people are intelligent, they're skilled, they're capable. Think back, I asked that first question at the start of this talk, when I asked you to raise your hands. Think about the person you helped. Were they capable? Were they skilled? Were they intelligent? So the guy with the kayaking thing who emailed himself, he clearly was qualified in water safety. He was a very competent kayaker. He knew all about safeguarding and things like that. Ran his own business. So he's competent, he's intelligent, he's skilled, just doesn't have tech skills. just doesn't have tech skills. That's it. So if you think about the person that you helped, maybe you think the same. You know, they were intelligent. Maybe they're skilled in other ways. But just because they're intelligent and skilled in other ways doesn't mean we can assume they've got tech skills. So that 1/4 of the population can't use a computer is a serious element of what is known as the digital divide. This is because even today, computers are too complex for many people. So that all sounds really bad, but maybe we're not interested in user skills outside the UK. So luckily, the Office for National Statistics produced a recent report on the digital divide in the UK specifically. So let's go through that. And you need to pay attention to this bit because I'm going to ask you some questions. So the ONS report relies on something called the Tech Partnership Basic Digital Skills Framework, which describes 5 basic digital skills that can be used to measure digital inclusion. The 5 skills are divided into 11 tasks, as we'll see. So for a person to qualify as having the skill, they only needed to respond that they could complete one of the tasks for each of the skills. You'll see what that means in a second. So we're going to do a quick quiz. I'm going to take you through the 5 key skills. I'm going to break them down into the 11 tasks. I want you to score a point for each task that you could do if asked, or if you have done the task in the last 3 months. If you're paying attention and you're being honest, you should end up with a score out of 11 at the end of this. So tick these off as we go. The first skill is managing information. Can our audience manage information? Can you use a search engine to look for information online? Score a point if you can, or if you have in the last 3 months. Can you find a website you have visited before? Again, score a point. Can you download or save a photograph you found online? The second skill is communicating. Can you send a personal message via email or an online messaging service? Could you carefully make comments and share information online? Again, score your point. I hope you're keeping score as you go along. The third skill is transacting. Have you bought an item or service from a website? Could you buy an item or service from a website? Could you buy and install an app on a device? Doesn't necessarily need to be a laptop or anything like that. Could you just, quite a simple thing. So the fourth skill is problem solving. Could you verify sources of information that you found online? Can you solve a problem with a digital device? With a device or a digital service using online help? And the fifth and final skill is creating. I hope you're still keeping score. Could you complete an online application form which includes personal details? And finally, could you create something new from an existing online image, music, or video? So, I know most people use like Instagram and things like that. Can you, if you had a photograph or you took a photograph online, could you then repost it as something new? So you should have a score out of 11 for each of those tasks that you could do or have done in the last 3 months. So Claire's going to put another poll up. I would like to see your score out of 11, and we'll see how skilled our audience is. So give everybody 30 seconds to respond or get the votes in. I'm really interested in this, so please do be honest.
Most of the votes are in, there's still a few more coming in. Right, I'm going to close the poll now.
Right, let's see. All right, that's interesting. So 88% of people had all 11 skills. 8% of people, 5 to 7. Okay, so yeah, that's really, really fascinating. But yeah, we're quite a skilled bunch as an audience. In the majority? Great, that's really good. And remember, the thing to remember is that you only needed to complete like one task in each of those subsets of skills to qualify as having the digital skill. But maybe that tells us a little bit about our audience and also about our users. So as recently as 2019, 11.3 million people in the UK did not have all 5 basic digital skills, and that's around 20% of the population. So remember that a respondent only needed to say that they could perform one of the tasks within that skill set for it to count as them having that particular digital skill. So the people who responded that they had 5 or scored 5 or 7 out of that could still all have those 5 digital skills. and they would count as highly skilled under the ONS survey. 4.3 million people, or 8% of the UK population, had no basic digital skills at all. That's quite shocking. And then there was a global pandemic and everyone was forced online. Family Zoom quizzes, who remembers setting those up? Ordering grocery shopping online and trying to help your parents, or I certainly had to help my parents use the Tesco app. WhatsApp groups for the streets where you live. Yeah, that counts as like digital engagement because WhatsApp is a digital platform. You have to use the internet. The COVID lockdown has created a major uplift in digital activity since 2020. So in fact, between 2011 and 2021, the number of people who have either never used the internet or not used it in the last 3 months dropped from 20% to 5% in the UK population. And that 5% number was a target for 2025. So the pandemic has actually forced people online at a faster rate than had been expected. But that 5% still represents 2.6 million adults. 5% doesn't sound like much, does it? But that's 1 in 20 people, just like 1 in 20 people are level 3 users. And it would be easy to dismiss that as a generational thing, but 1 in 10 of those people who are offline are under the age of 50. That's quite shocking, I think. Crucially, 40% of people surveyed this year had low or very low digital index score. That survey was done in March of this year. So that's even after the pandemic, when you've been forced online. It wasn't an even split either. 29% of the people surveyed had a very low digital engagement. So what's the point? What's the point of all this? Why am I telling you all these horrible stats? If you work in tech, as it's likely that most of us do, you're in that top 5 to 8% of the population. So well done you, give yourself a big pat on the back, aren't we brilliant? This is especially true because some of you who code will have spotted that I haven't used a strict comparison operator in this slide. Now, consider the earlier definition of level 3 skills. Consider undertaking a task where the goals are not explicitly defined. What would you do if you encountered some unexpected outcomes while using a computer? Would you give up and then just throw it away? Do you sometimes have to evaluate the results from an operation and decide which ones are relevant, which ones are reliable? Do these things sound like things that you're capable of as an audience? Could you do this stuff? What's important to remember is that around 95% of the population can't do these things. You are not the user. So just because you can do something doesn't mean that the average user can do it as well. So if you think something is easy, or you think, I've written this thing in my app and surely people can do this simple thing on our website, then you might be wrong. If you want to target a broad consumer audience, it's safest to assume your users' skills are those specified for level 1. Now, if you need a reminder about that, level 1 users can complete tasks where the goal is explicitly stated and for which the necessary operations are within a single and familiar environment. The problems that they can solve involve a relatively small number of steps and or a limited amount of monitoring across a large number of actions. If you make things more difficult than level 1, you're reducing your user base to 31% of the population from OECD countries. That includes the people who didn't complete the tasks. Or 35% of the UK population, according to the OECD survey. Now, that OECD survey data was gathered sort of, for 2016. But remember that 40% of people that had low or very low digital index score in 2021, based on the UK Consumer Digital Index report. So here's what I want you to take away today. Just remember this, the 5%, you are the 5%. So when you're developing software or designing or testing or anything else you do at work that involves creating technology for people to use, try and consider what you can do to help your users get stuff done without them having to call on one of the 5% to help them. Think about the people that you have helped with that technological task. Think about how they would use your software. And if you do that, we'll build better software for everybody. That's all I wanted to tell you today. So thanks very much for listening and participating in the polls. That was really interesting. So I wondered whether or not anybody had any questions.